Hello, everybody. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Peter Llewellyn, and I run the services at MedComms where we provide information and resources for people who work in and around the MedComms business, by which I mean medical communications, medical education, medical publishing, and so on. You'll find lots of useful resource there. At the moment, we're running these Zoom meetings. We've been doing so for some time, which is a great way of engaging more people, more speakers, more people from around the world in the discussions. And wherever possible, we record the sessions and they will then be posted on NetworkPharma TV, where you can now find in excess of 200 videos. So there's quite a good resource building up there. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Sarah, who's come along today from Envision to talk about sustainability in medical communications, which is an interesting topic. But I'm not going to say any more. I'm going to hand over to Sarah for a presentation. So over to you, Sarah.
Thank you, Peter. Okay, so I'm just going to share the presentation with you all. Can you just confirm you can see the screen? Okay. So first of all, thank you very much for joining today. It's impressive to see so many people, and I'm really pleased that a lot of people were interested in this topic. Just to start a little bit for people who don't know me at all, I just wanted to tell you a bit about my background. So I'm certainly an enthusiast on this topic, but by no means an expert. And it's something that I just have a real focused interest in. So I have a scientific background. I started out my career, first of all, in pharmaceuticals. I was a rep and I was on the road for about 3 years. And then I moved into medical communications and have been doing that for about 8 years. And I've been at Envision for the last 3 as a senior account director. So I have a bit of a passion about this topic, and you'll see as I go through the presentation how that started and where it's come to today. The presentation that we have is really aimed at medical communications professionals, so whether that's agencies or any clients who are also working in communications for their group. It's a bit of a strange one today, as I think Peter touched on. We decided to run this webinar on this topic quite a few weeks ago, and it was before the whole COVID-19 situation struck. And whilst we're in the midst of this at the moment, it feels a bit strange to be talking about things like travel, etc., just given where we are. And I know that there's a lot of concern, a lot of worry, and the world's a bit of a difficult place right now. So I do appreciate people tuning in to talk about another not so fun subject. I think it is important that people have made time, because despite what's happening with COVID-19, the battle against the environmental crisis is an important one, and it's not going away. And I think that actually it's an interesting time because we can draw some parallels between what's happening in the world at the moment and with how to address the climate crisis. So some of the lessons we can hopefully take forward. I don't have lots of slides. I'm hopefully going to present for around about 20 minutes. And then, as Peter said, it'd be great to open up the conversation, get your question. I just really want to motivate people to start thinking about how we can be more sustainable in medical communications. Okay. So I have 3 main objectives for the session. The first of all, I just want to look at the benefits of being more environmentally sustainable. It's quite obvious what the benefits are for the planet, but actually there are a lot of benefits in medical communications that will really help us do our jobs well and serve our clients well. Secondly, I think we need to take a bit of a look at how the pharmaceutical industry itself plays a role in climate change, how it can drive climate change, and also how it can be one of the solutions. And when we understand that, we'll be better able to serve our clients and support them. And finally, I want to talk a bit about some of the things that I've been doing and that we've been doing at Envision Pharma Group, and just share some best practice and hopefully inspire some of the people here today to maybe start some of those things at their own agencies, or perhaps you've been doing things and you can share them with us. So this slide here is a rather depressing, gloomy outlook to begin with, but what's on screen are a handful of headlines. And I'm sure you're seeing lots of headlines like this all the time. We are absolutely bombarded through the media and the news outlets about how bad the outlook is for the planet. There's a lot of these sorts of apocalyptic headlines. With this volume of headlines, I think it's quite easy to feel like one person, and this is an overwhelming problem, and really what can I do as one person, what can we do? And to actually make any difference, it feels like a bit of an uphill battle. But I think it is important that we do all take action, and I know it affects people in different ways. In fact, about 3 years ago, the term eco-anxiety was coined, and it really speaks to that that feeling that the world is in impending doom and there's nothing we can do about it. But that simply isn't true. There are lots of things we can do, and the focus of this webinar is to really look at how we can do that through our work and take practical action. It's not an easy solution. The causes of climate change are incredibly complicated and different complex solutions. There are over 7 billion people on the planet right now, and the actions that every single person makes will collectively make a difference. We don't need a small handful of people doing things perfectly and changing the world. We need everybody to, just do a little bit. And I think we can actually draw parallels with with the COVID-19 situation right now. We all know that by staying in our homes and washing our hands, we are individually contributing to the collective prevention of a disease, and climate change is really no different. But that said, the opportunity for people to actually impact climate change isn't so evenly spread. You hear climate change being talked about as an equality issue sometimes. The developed countries are producing higher carbon emissions than the developing countries, and therefore people in those countries have a bigger responsibility to actually take action and reduce that. And just to highlight that, the headline that's in the top left, the Britons reach Africa's annual carbon emissions in just 2 weeks, really just highlights that actually in the UK here, it only took us 12 days this year to produce the same emissions that somebody in many African nations will produce in a whole year. So just to take that one step further and put that into the context of what we do, part of MedComms involves a huge amount of travel, whether that's to an advisory board or going to a congress, and it's very easy to almost forget the carbon footprint of those flights. And just taking one flight a year can produce more carbon emissions than this is in many countries around the world. So given these facts, it's important that we understand our responsibility and take that into looking at what we can actually do. And just to flag here, the COVID-19 situation is, it's undoubtedly horrendous. There's a lot of challenges going on in the world right now, and we're going to feel the negative effects of that on people's health and the economy for a really long time to come. But I like to look for silver linings in things, and I think some of you might be familiar with some of the images on the screen here. These are the air pollution levels of the UK, Italy and China in March 2019. And these are the levels of emissions in March 2020. So I think it's just a really stark image that just shows that some immediate changes can make an immediate impact, and we don't need to feel that climate change is too far gone and it's irreversible. It absolutely isn't, and all of our actions will make a difference. 1/4 of the world's population at the moment is stuck in lockdown. But humans, we are a very adaptive species. We will be resourceful. Many industries have had to ground to a halt at the moment, but in the pharmaceutical industry and in MedComms, a lot of activities are still happening business as usual. We are all finding novel and different ways to adapt and make sure that we're delivering things for our clients and still meeting their objectives, whether that's working from home, attending a congress online, or a CAMS detailing a HCP through a remote meeting instead. So my personal hope really is that we can take some of the learnings from this horrible situation and actually take them as lessons forward to implement some solutions in the long term that will benefit our carbon footprint. So in medical communications, there are benefits to this aside from saving the planet. And I think we need to consider those and look at what's important to us. So when we think about the values that we have as agencies, we're communications partners to our clients, and it's really important that our values reflect and mirror those of our clients so that we can bring value to them. You will see in the presentation that a lot of pharma companies have started to really seriously take steps to address climate change, and it's important that we do that alongside them. We've actually already started to see in RFPs coming through now that they want to understand any credentials that we have around sustainability and how we'll bear that in mind when we're delivering projects for them. When it comes to recruitment and retention, we all know in this industry it's very tricky to recruit good people into our businesses. And so we want to have, the best offering to those people. And I think being able to demonstrate that level of corporate social responsibility and really show through our values that our companies care will help recruit people, and it will also help with retention in terms of staff wellbeing and happiness. Whenever we're faced with a challenge, people inevitably become innovative and find creative solutions, and we can use climate change to our advantage to offer new solutions to clients and really drive ways of thinking about things differently. And then when we look at future legislation, we can see now that government talks are progressing rather slowly, but we know that things will come in terms of legislation. Governments around the world have targets, and they will start to implement legislation that affects businesses to make sure that, collectively we can meet our carbon neutral goals. So getting ahead of that curve now is going to be for the better. It's much better to lead that than to be dragged along. And the final point, I think, is we all work in the pharmaceutical industry, and we're all aware that, some people don't have positive perceptions of the pharmaceutical industry still nowadays. And I think it's important that we work with our clients to really drive those perceptions and help people see that, pharmaceutical industries are there to look after patients, and whether that's, through the medicines that they produce or a more holistic wellbeing approach for those patients, the environmental factors fall into that as well. So it helps us help them, and it means that we can take pride in what we do. So just to dig into that a little bit further, pharma contributes to climate change in a couple of different ways, but it is actually set to gain financially from climate change related medical needs. So as temperatures rise and rainfall increases, we will see increased transmission of diseases, things like malaria, dengue fever, cholera. Respiratory illnesses are expected to increase, as well as things like methane are released into the atmosphere, and things like asthma are expected to increase as well. When we see extreme weather conditions, droughts, hurricanes, etc., we know that puts up challenges, particularly in developing countries, in terms of food supply. People end up malnourished, and they're less able to fight off diseases. And mental health impact as well is also something that's on the increase. So it's fantastic that the pharmaceutical industry produces solutions and treatments for these people and can help their health. But we need to make sure that there's no perception that the pharmaceutical industry is set to gain financially from this, and therefore might not have a vested interest in doing things to reduce it. And just like any other industry, the pharmaceutical industry produces emissions itself through its activities. So whether it's the production facilities, addressing the waste of medicines around the world, it's a huge problem that a lot of medicines are in single-use packaging that's designed to be thrown away. And what happens to that afterwards. And then, of course, the transport and travel, and that's both logistically transporting drugs around the world, but also for its people. So when you take into account both of these factors, it's really important for us that we can help our clients really clearly communicate about their environmental goals and make sure that they're seen as part of the solution. So designated sustainability leads within their organisations, and really starting to talk about this in the public domain through press releases, etc. And when you look at the top global pharmaceutical companies, they all have set out on a mission to reduce their emissions, and even go steps further by supporting initiatives and investing in cross-collaboration activities. So when you go on the corporate website for most pharmaceutical companies, you see things like those that are on the slide here. Activities will include things like tree planting schemes, changing their fleets over to electric vehicles, investment in research in novel packaging technology, working across the industry and with climate change organisations to fund and support activities. And one thing that I find interesting is when I was researching this, the vast majority are keen to actually avoid carbon offsetting schemes, but to genuinely go carbon neutral, which I think is impressive. So as medical communications partners, we really need to be aligned with these values and the priorities of our clients. We need to be using the same language as them. We need to be reflecting their goals through the work that we do together. And just to take that one step further, it's not just that pharma companies are putting pretty pictures of trees on their website and saying that they're doing things. They genuinely are. So the Dow Jones Sustainability Indices, it's an independent in-depth analysis of economic, social, environmental performance of companies globally around the world in all industries. And actually, a number of pharmaceutical companies are recognised on this list. The last report was out in September 2019, and I think that just goes to show that they're not just saying they're doing things, but the action really is in place and it's being seen. So I think the communication of those goals and those values is really important, and that's where we can support through our partnerships with our clients. So within medical communications, there are three key aspects that I think are really in our control and things that we can influence and have an impact on. So when we're looking at travel, clearly the amount of travel is quite significant, whether that's an agency flying for a face-to-face meeting, whether it's attending congresses, even within our own companies internally, we will have people on flights for internal meetings. So the travel aspect is really a big area of carbon emissions. We are communicators, and that involves often print items and production of things. So whether that's materials for training, communications out to doctors, or even exhibition booths and things, it's something that we need to consider. And it's not just about the paper that we choose to print on, but it's also thinking about the transport of that and the emissions associated, and also how do we dispose of it responsibly at the end. And then finally, as MedComms vendors, we are people. That's what we sell. We sell our services. And so people and workspace is a big element that's quite tricky to break down. It's made up of lots of different elements, and some of those are in control of our employers, and some of those are in control of the people who work there. But together, all of these different things add up to quite a significant amount of emissions and waste if we don't focus on them. So these three elements are core, essential components of our business, and so it's important to look at how we can still do them, but do them more sustainably. So I think there are some barriers that we see to change, and understanding those is really important so that we can try to overcome them. So on the first point, really, we are seeing now in the COVID-19 world that, people do like people. People are going stir crazy at home without personal contact, and that relationship building, both for us as vendors with our clients, but also for pharma and HCPs, is important. And it's going to be hard to break down that barrier and convince people that not everything needs to be done face-to-face and needs to involve travel. Medical conferences, thousands of people from around the world will gather for scientific exchange and to network, and that's really important, and it's not something that we want to lose. So finding ways to do that is going to be critical. We still have about 30% of HCPs that are not digital natives, and so a lot of innovation around reducing emissions is linked to technology. And so there's some resistance to that, but I fully expect that after the COVID-19 situation, most people will have got on board with technology like Zoom, for example, and will, be more comfortable with those things. Making changes can involve a cost, whether that's the time of your staff or a financial cost, and that's something that needs to be considered. And also just generally a lack of motivation. You're all here on this meeting today because you have a sense of urgency about the climate crisis, but not everybody does, and that can prevent people from taking action. So I just have a couple of slides here to look at possible solutions on how we can take action. Some of those things can be done internally at an agency level, and others are things that we can partner with our clients on. So I think the first point, starting with your own action, leading by example, is really important. So I'm incredibly lucky that I sort of started banging the drum about this last year at Envision Pharma Group, and I immediately got support from my managers here to have the autonomy, and I was empowered to go and do something about this. So I started a number of activities which I'll explain to you that have really sort of driven that forward. And I think having that person with that passion is really important. I think just having the conversation, chatting to colleagues about it, chatting to your managers about it, ask the question, why are we doing this? Who supplies our energy to this building? They're all valid questions, and they can help make a change. I think it's surprising how many vendors will be open to the conversation and will be very happy to talk to you about what they do or what they could do instead. And we have lots of vendors, whether that's the cleaners, at the office, or it's our print suppliers, and we can set standards for sustainability for those. And finally, I think thinking about one of the barriers before, the financial barrier, if we push to travel less in our industry, that could actually result in reduced revenue for us as vendors. So finding ways to make sure that that revenue loss isn't something that's going to be a concern by offering added value solutions to clients will, really, really support that. And then when we think about partnering with our clients, again, having the conversation, not just internally, but with clients. I think they're people like us, they're worried about the environment. There's a lot to be said for just opening up that conversation and understanding where they are, and also understanding those barriers so you can overcome them. We do a lot of work in terms of gathering audience insights. So whether it's market research with HCPs, whether it's online audits and things, we spend a lot of time trying to understand what HCPs want and how to communicate with them. And if we bear sustainability in mind when we ask some of those questions and gather those insights, we can probably find out a little bit more to help us do better in this area. I think whenever we get a client brief, it's very easy to jump towards, well, let's do an ad board, let's get people together, let's have a training meeting, for example. But if we could take a step back and look at our clients' objectives and think if there's a more sustainable way to achieve those, then we'll be better able to find solutions. I think one of the most important responsibilities we have as partners to our clients is making sure that when we do deliver something that is, for example, a virtual solution rather than face-to-face, we do it really, really well, because if we can show and demonstrate that we can still deliver high quality for our clients and they don't need to compromise on these more sustainable solutions, then that will really help them stick to them in the long term. And for those people that don't really value the idea of being more sustainable, there are other ways to sell the idea to them, whether it's just showing that doing something a bit differently can make them look like they're being innovative, or it can help their corporate social responsibility, then I think there's other ways to sell this in. Just sharing ideas, articles of interest and innovation will help keep the topic alive. And finally, I think coming back to the cost point again, we don't just want to share the cost of new solutions, but let's highlight what saving money by not printing items, for example, or not travelling to a congress can actually save them as well. So I just wanted to sort of finally share what we've been doing at Envision Pharma Group. So we started on this initiative late last year, around about September time, and we started out internally with a brainstorm in my office. I'm in an office at Envision with about 50 people, and it really got people motivated, it got people engaged. We came up with so many ideas about things that we could change in our working practice. And that really, really ignited the conversation. And now we're rolling things out more widely across the company. So this year we'll be running those meetings at a local level. And that's involved everything from, having a swap shop where we could bring in our unwanted items and making sure they're being reused rather than going to landfill, and reassessing the things we order on our weekly shop, and setting up a number of working groups to organise tree planting schemes and those sorts of things. On the travel point, we have invested, our company have invested money in video conferencing technology in the offices to make sure it's an easy solution. And we have a lot of expertise and support in terms of delivering virtual meetings now, which helps us. One thing that we've done that's been developed recently and will be rolled out when travel starts up again is a hints and tips sheet. So when people are traveling on site, because we know it has to happen, they can just be more mindful about their impact on the environment. And then finally, on the print and production point, we've looked at how some of our exhibition booths can become more sustainable and be reused in the future, and moving towards some more digital platforms, such as digital work mats and those sorts of things. So just to finish, in terms of the key points from that, I think we know that the climate crisis is incredibly urgent and everybody must take action now. And the pharmaceutical industry does play a major role in carbon emissions, and they are trying to shift towards a more sustainable future in all of their activities. And as agency partners, we really need to be supporting that change and reflecting their values ourselves. The situation isn't straightforward, and what we do isn't going to change the world, but what everybody does counts. It can be overwhelming, but any step in the right direction is going to count. It's a collective effort. And I think importantly, there are always commercial opportunities to be gained in any situation, but on this topic specifically, I think cross-industry collaboration between pharma companies and between agencies is going to be the most effective solution in the long term. Okay, so with that, I will stop sharing the screen, and thank you for listening to me.
Excellent. Okay, thanks, Sarah. And you can hear me now as well, yeah? Okay. So look, that was excellent. I don't want us to dwell on it, but let's just make one more comment. I mean, when we talked, and it was a lot of weeks ago, or it feels like a lot of weeks ago, I think, and to where we are today, it's a very different environment and different sense of what's going on around us. So I suspect we're all thinking slightly differently than we would have been without the sort of COVID-19 type situation.
Yeah.
A lot of that is I just thought a lot of that was really very, very useful and very interesting and thought-provoking, and I'm hoping that people will, at the very least, use these sorts of points as a way of talking and thinking internally with their in-house teams, whatever, about what they can do. I'm a great believer with the whole climate change thing, that and this is a personal view, I don't want to, with respect to everybody, but it's easy to sort of jump to the nightmare scenario, and that's just too much for us to cope with. But little steps can add up, as you've been saying. And I think with the COVID-19 thing, the really interesting thing is we've been forced to take a big step. And actually the interesting aspect is we can then come back a bit from that maybe and find a slightly more happy medium. I will say to everybody who's listening, please, again, a reminder, you've got a chat button and a Q&A button at the bottom of your screens. We would love to hear from you with your questions and comments, and indeed your experiences. If you're doing things in your companies and yourself that can contribute to this, please do share that, please. And we're going to have 10 minutes or so of Q&A before we stop the recording. So just one thing I wanted to ask, and this is my naivety or whatever you want to call it, but I don't do MedComms anymore, so I don't see some of this stuff. You mentioned that RFPs now are asking for I think you said something like, they're asking for examples or asking for guidance as to what you're doing as an agency, as a vendor, in terms of sustainability. I just wondered what sort of questions they are asking and what they're getting at there. I just don't quite know whether I understand quite what they would be asking and what you'd be telling them. Can you help me understand that a bit better?
Yeah, so I think it's just around the way in which we can deliver our services. So the pharma company itself will have its own targets and goals and parameters for their internal working practices around the environment, around the environmental impact, and so they just want their vendors to be able to reflect that. So it's just showing that we can provide sustainable services.
Okay, I suppose I'm still struggling to get the nitty-gritty, but let's pick up some examples. There's people asking some questions here about offsetting and so on. So am I missing the point, or is that a company saying, look, we offset all our travel, do you offset your travel? Is that a sort of practical, simple example of the sort of thing you're talking about?
Yeah, so I just saw a couple of questions coming up there on the offsetting one. I think I think carbon offsetting, it's quite a controversial topic. I certainly have my personal opinion on it. Okay. I think as an option, it's better than nothing. I think people funding schemes that can help offset the carbon is a good solution. I think the danger comes when people fail to take action to reduce their emissions because they think they can just offset it. It's almost like paying your way out of the problem. But I think that the science is showing us that the no amount of carbon offsetting is going to completely outweigh the carbon emissions we produce if we don't also take steps to reduce them. So I think they can help, but to me, when a company says we are trying to go carbon neutral through our carbon emissions, not through offsetting, that shows that they're making a genuine change to the way in which they power their production facilities, for example, or whatever it is that's causing their emissions.
Okay, I'm going to come back and I'm going to keep pinning you down on this one. I can see how a pharma company goes, we're going to change our manufacturing. What are they expecting you as an agency to do?
So I think,
I don't want to push this on too far, but are they already pushing for virtual conferencing in place of travel and face-to-face and that sort of thing? Were they doing that anyway?
I think some clients are pushing for that for various reasons, not just related to the environment. They want us to be able to show those capabilities because there's benefits of online meetings in other ways. But yeah, it's around the capabilities of the services. Can we provide those types of virtual meeting platforms and offer those solutions? And also, when it comes to like print items, for example, are we able to provide, sustainable materials for those things? When it comes to building exhibition booths as well, we have our clients specifically request sustainable options for exhibition booths that are made of certain materials that can be shipped with minimum amount of emissions from the freight and those sorts of things.
Okay, that makes sense. I mean, I do think. I mean, I did MedComms quite a long time ago, so forgive my sort of sounding like the old chap here. But you know, the exhibition stands of old, where £250,000 spent on an exhibition stand, which was just trashed at the end, sort of thing. I mean, those days presumably have gone anyway, haven't they?
Yeah, I think so. I know certainly the clients that I work with, they try to reuse their exhibition stands, so the same materials are then packed up and taken to the next place. And certainly in terms of the materials that they're made from in the first place are made with sustainability in mind.
Okay, and sticking like the conference scene, the travel scene, and all the rest of it. I mean, as I say, our conversation is probably now going to be a little bit different to what it would have been if this COVID-19 thing hadn't happened. You know, I mean, I've certainly been stunned. Stunned is probably a fair word, actually, in the last couple of weeks, by people who would never have thought it possible to do a video conference, who now seem to be, you know, evangelizing it. And I think, you know, there are situations where it doesn't work so well. And I had a meeting cancelled a couple of weeks ago, which was going to be much better if we'd all got together in a room. There's no two ways about it. But we still rescued a part of it and did a very good online meeting, and that was great. But it's about balance, isn't it? And it might not be about cancelling everything. It's just using the technology.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think what's happening at the moment is going to allow us to just stop that autopilot response of let's have a meeting, so let's get together. And it will allow us to assess what's worked well virtually and what can we keep doing in the future, and actually what was fine, but it wasn't so great. And, you know, I mean, when you think back to that slide I presented at the beginning, just that one flight can be the same emissions as somebody in a developing nation somewhere. So even if you now take 10 flights and next year it becomes 7, you know, it's still a massive reduction, and every step counts. So I think anything where we can identify those reductions is all going to be a collective bonus.
And you know, and I put my hand up. I mean, I won't be the only person on this call who's taken a flight in the past to, you know, somewhere for lunch and come back in, sort of thing. And that sort of thing, you know, I'm not going to feel embarrassed about what I did in the past, but you know, that's the sort of thing I wouldn't do now. But video conference for me is the game changer, because personally, I hate teleconferences where you're on the telephone and you don't know who's talking on. The video conferencing really has changed things for me dramatically, because I know it's not exactly as good as sitting in the room together with you, but I'm chatting to you more or less as well as chatting to you. And that, I think, as I say, a lot of people are starting to realize that it is very, very good, because we can see each other and we can see each other getting bored or wanting to ask something, or saying, shut up, Llewellyn, you know, let's, and the whole dynamic is very, very different. Yeah. But when it comes down to the relationship building stuff, which you mentioned a couple of times, relationship building, and it's a big part of what we're all doing all the time. So if, you know, although I'm quite comfortable talking to you, we don't know each other very well, you know, but there would be an argument to say, actually, it would be good if I went and met Sarah a couple of times, and then heck, we can do it by video all the time after that. So there is a difference there, isn't there? And I just wondered, you know, maybe particularly at the moment with the clients, what's the situations are you finding in real life out there where it's having an impact like that? It's not just, I want to do a presentation, you listen to it, but it's a relationship building thing as well.
Yeah. It is, and I think it's changing your approach to these things. So previously, if you saw somebody in person on a frequent basis, then when you have a teleconference or even a video call with them, you'll just go straight to business. You won't bother with that, how was your weekend? Do you want a cup of tea? You won't do all of those things that are that kind of relationship building element. And I think that can get lost virtually. But given the current situation, we're having to do that either on teleconference or video call now, because we don't have a choice. So I think it's about the approach and taking that time at the beginning or the end of the meeting to make it a little bit less formal, and to allow and reflect what would happen in that natural kind of face-to-face environment. And I think if we mix some of that in with the face-to-face contact, then I think that will really help. And I know certainly at Envision we've been looking at, we've been talking a lot about how do you effectively facilitate an online meeting, because it's quite different to doing it in the room and making sure that everyone gets chance, to speak and everybody's comfortable. And I just think that in the current situation, people are becoming more and more comfortable with that. A big thing that we struggled with previously was not everybody was so comfortable about being on video. People just don't like to see themselves on video. You don't want to see your own face staring back at you. And so people were reluctant to put the video on, but in a bid to stay in touch and keep the team motivated, both with ourselves internally and with clients, we've started using the videos more while we've been working from home. And I just think that again has increased a sense of being comfortable with that setup, and that will, I hope that will continue when you know, people go back to the office.
I mean, part of the, and that specific problem intrigues me, because I found that that surprised me in some of the situations over the last few months when I've been doing this sort of thing, and people not turning their videos on, sort of thing, and it makes it much more difficult to facilitate the discussion. But a very obvious point was made in a meeting I was in yesterday. You know, if you are really not feeling very comfortable looking at yourself on video, and certainly on Zoom, which we're on today, then hide your video, and you're not looking at yourself, you're just looking at other people. And it's, you know, again, this is all about familiarity and understanding and thinking around what's going on. But just by clicking the self-hide or whatever the term is on Zoom, and you shut your video to yourself, you know, suddenly people become much more comfortable because they're not looking at themselves, talk to themselves, and that's all familiarity, isn't it? Which this situation is forcing change as we work that sort of stuff out, which I find fascinating. In terms of meetings, sorry, go on.
I was just going to add to that. There's platforms that we've used for years, like WebEx, GoToMeeting, for example, and we've used the same functionality in them day in, day out. And then all of a sudden we've been pushed to explore what does this button do and what does this mean? And we found that these solutions have got breakout rooms and all the rest of it. And, you know, things that maybe a few people in the company had expertise in, but on a general basis, people didn't, because they didn't need it before. So I just think that people's understanding of how far we can push the systems and what we can get out of them is really increasing as well, and that will help massively.
On that note, I mean, it's also worth saying that some of these companies are responding incredibly fast to develop the program, or the platform. So something that wasn't possible 6 months ago, even 3 months ago, suddenly there's stuff that's available to you, and you know, it's almost a full-time job just to keep up with the sort of the facilities that are becoming available, and the sort of the crisis has pushed innovation dramatically fast, which and creative thinking and so on, which I absolutely find fascinating. But probably this isn't the place to get bogged down in how to run interactive meetings properly and all the rest of it. I mean, breakout rooms, whiteboards, all the rest of it. But it's all possible. It's not the same, but it's all possible.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's a simple message.
Yeah.
Well, sorry, I'm just trying to read the questions at the same time on my little screen, and I'm struggling a bit. So sorry, everybody who's watching this. But so the working practices are all changing, and the travel, I think, is going to change dramatically. That's obvious. But I just wanted to, you know, maybe even just wrap up in the final couple of minutes. I think some of the points, I don't want to lose some of the points you were talking about with the sort of basic ways in which we can change the way we live, work and play sort of thing. I think as an example, I think you've talked about, you know, talking to your cleaning company and looking at the products that are being used and things like that. I mean, some of it almost sounds a little bit sort of twee, but actually there's probably some very sensible practical stuff that can be done very easily if people are talking about this stuff.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And it's good to see that, and something like Envision isn't finding that a problem. They're embracing that as a company.
No, not at all. It's been really great, actually. I started, I asked if I could do something just at an internal meeting, and then I was given the floor, and the enthusiasm from the colleagues was really, really exciting. And I thought, oh, here's me banging on about this topic, and I was pleasantly surprised. And then when we spoke to some of the senior leaders, you know, I got support from them, and there's a number of things being done now at a bigger company level. So I think if there's anybody listening who's in another agency and thinking, you know, I'd love to see this at my company, I think just start the conversation, just start asking the questions, because it's not that, I've not found, it's not that people don't want to do something, it's just that they're busy and maybe the thought just hasn't crossed their mind. And once you start questioning things and suggesting things, you know, you get a massive amount of backing straight away, and that's gone internally with clients and with our vendors as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, look, what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop the recording part of the session now, if that's okay, Sarah. We've still got questions coming in, and we'll carry on talking, but it's very meetings related to questions stuff. So let's come and talk a bit more about that. But for the purposes of this, the recording, which I think we'll get away with, so thank you very much. I'm going to say to everyone who's listening, thank you for listening, but also to Sarah, huge thank you for joining in. And if anybody wants to contact you, Sarah, and follow up these conversations, then you're very happy to hear from them. LinkedIn is the obvious way to do that, isn't it? Yeah. Okay. So do follow up.
Absolutely. Yeah. Go for it.
Okay, excellent. So I'm gonna stop the recording now, and I'm just gonna go.
Okay.
So at this point, Sarah, it's a thing. We just have to wave as we stop the recording now. So just wave and say bye. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.